The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Jennifer Schaus coming to you live from Washington, D.C., and thanks for joining us in our Webinar Wednesday series. We host a webinar every Wednesday throughout the entire year of 2018, and our subject matter covers government contracting topics. Sorry, skipped a slide there. So as I mentioned, it's every Wednesday. They are complimentary. All of the webinars are recorded, so you can find us on our website under the webinar section. There is an archive section under the webinars, so that's where you can get the recordings, or you can find us on our YouTube channel. Our presenters are industry experts, and that can range from attorneys, accountants, other industry experts who have some knowledge about government contracting to share. We don't take any questions, so if you have questions about today's presentation, you can contact our speaker, Lou Crenshaw, directly. His contact information is going to be on the last slide. Just a quick word about us. We are based in downtown Washington, D.C., and provide professional services for federal contractors, both in the product and service sectors. That ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing, including GSA schedules, some of the small business certifications, and then for companies that are already doing business with the government, we help with contract administration, compliance, and reporting. We do obviously host these webinars, and we also have networking events and seminars throughout the year. You can find those on our website under the events section. So a little bit about our speaker, Vice Admiral Lou Crenshaw, who's going to be speaking in just a moment. He's got an impressive background, which you can see here on this slide, and as I mentioned, his contact information will be on the last slide. So today, Lou is going to be covering 30 minutes with DOD execs. And Lou, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand the floor over to you and let you dig into a topic that is near and dear to your heart that you know very well. So thanks again for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be here today. And it is a topic that I have some passion about. Over my 30 plus years in the Navy, I've had my share of contractors and others come through my office in an attempt to persuade me to do this or that. And then I switched sides of the fences as a partner in an accounting firm, now going in to see those executives. But more importantly than that, my experience in the private sector going in to see executives of large corporations was that there's very little difference in how they think and feel in large corporations as opposed to the senior executives, flag and general officers that you find in the Department of Defense. So while this is titled 30 Minutes with DOD Executives, it could just as well say 30 minutes with any executive that you're going to talk about. Next slide, please. So why do these matter? I'm really talking about these conversations where you have an initial conversation with somebody. You happen to meet them at a trade conference or just as a casual introduction from some other partner that you may have, and they say, hey, well, why don't you come by and chat with me about your particular product? And so that gives you a great opportunity to go in and see a senior person. So most of my remarks are really focused on today the very senior people. And we'll talk a little bit about when you're talking to those senior people, you have to remember that they are very, very busy people. They have probably just come out of some meeting. They've got another meeting that's on their mind. You've been sandwiched in between. They may or may not have remembered the conversation that they had with you. And so you have to sort of set the stage when you go in to remember that. And this is probably going to be the only chance you get to see a senior individual. I help many of my clients get in to see members of the senior executive service in DOD and in government. And this is probably going to be their one and only chance to sort of make an impression on them. And you have to remember that when you're talking to these senior executives, they're typically not the ones who actually move money and do things, but they're the ones who would direct you to direct people that work for them to do that. So what you want to do right up right up front, and why these conversations matter, is you want to establish credibility with these individuals, that you know what you're talking about, that you can understand their problems, that you're interested in being part of the team, not that you have the overall solution that'll fix everything, but that teaming with this person or this organization, you think that you may be able to be effective. So remember that when you're talking to these individuals, they're probably not going to be the ones that actually pull the trigger on deciding whether or not you get a pilot project or something like that. But if you don't establish your credibility with them, then you're not going to get any further. And this is also your opportunity to hear firsthand problems that people are having. You may think you know what those problems are, but hearing this from your potential customers straight from the horse's mouth, if you will, is the way is important. And you should always remember that when you go into these meetings, the goal of the meeting is not necessarily to walk out with a sales contract. The goal is to have follow-up meetings to establish a rapport with this individual and have the individual say, hey, I need for you, when you leave, I'm going to give you the phone number of the person who is my point person on this, and I want you to follow up with them, or I will have them contact you directly. That's where you've made money, and that's where you know that you've had probably a very effective conversation with this individual. Next slide, please. Okay, the first thing I think we need to talk about is what it's not. I have this discussion all the time with clients that I'm going to take in to visit with senior people. It's not a sales pitch. You're not going to try to sell them your product, at least not in this initial conversation. This is, number one, a chance for you to get to know the person, a chance for the person to get to know you, and a little bit about your company, but it's not a sales pitch. You will turn them off when you go in and try to sell them something right off the bat. It's not the used car. Mr. Smith, what do I have to do to have you drive off in this car today? It's not that sort of thing. This is about listening to their problems. You want to listen. It's also not a PowerPoint marathon. I advise many of my clients, in fact, most of my clients, on an initial meeting with a senior executive, don't go in with a PowerPoint presentation and make your presentation from a deck of PowerPoint slides. Number one, most of these executives spend all day looking at PowerPoint slides. As a person who has seen thousands of PowerPoint slides, I can tell you what those senior executives are doing. They are not listening to your PowerPoint presentation. At best, they are checking the spelling of your slides, and they're adding up the math on your slides. And more than likely, they are on slide 8 while you're still briefing on slide 2, because they didn't see anything that interested them on the first couple of slides. So my point is, maybe one slide to chat from as an overall conversation opener. I actually like the placemat technique, where instead of a big PowerPoint presentation, you have just one restaurant-sized placemat that has a couple of key points and maybe a diagram or two that you like. And that will allow them to focus on what you're saying and not check your spelling and check your math. It's also not a demo. I can't tell you how many times I've had folks come say, I want to go see Mr. Smith and we're going to show him our product. And this is a particular problem in the Pentagon, because nothing works in the Pentagon. It's a big dead hole over there. And people get into the system and they start trying to bring up their demo, and you hear, oh, I can't figure out what happened. It was working fine this morning, and now I can't pull it up, and we're waiting. And hey, can I connect onto your network? Answer, no. And so you're really putting your conversation at risk if you start trying to show them some sort of demo. The time for the demo is when you offer to show their staff, or even come back and show them a demo, or invite them to your place for a demo. That's the perfect time to do a demo, because you will lose them if you show them a demo than an initial conversation. If you must use slides, please do not read the slides. Nothing is worse with a senior executive than to have someone stand in front of them and read the slides back to them. So very important. So also, I can't tell you how many times I've been to meetings where people pull out their cell phones and put them on the desk. They're fidgeting with them. They're looking at it every once in a while. The cell phone screen lights up. It's distracting to people. You know, you've got 30 minutes to see this very senior person. Turn your phone off. You can do without it for 30 minutes and let the person that you're talking to be the focus of your conversation. Nothing is more disrespectful and nothing is noticed more by executives than people who are constantly glancing down at their phones to make sure they haven't missed something important. And I'll admit I'm a little guilty of this now that I have an Apple Watch, because every time that little sucker vibrates, I got to glance down at it to see if someone's calling or what exactly it is. And so I've gotten to the point now where I don't even bring my Apple Watches when I go to these sorts of meetings. It's just more important. And a conversation, an effective conversation, is not you transmitting. An effective conversation is you listening to what this person has to say. Remember, establishing empathy and showing concern is very important in these initial conversations. I'm interested in what your problems are these days. Where are you spending your time? I saw in the newspaper yesterday that you were having a very hard time with your migration to the cloud. Tell me about how that's going. What is concerning to you about that? And then listen. Take notes and listen. It's very important. An effective conversation is one in which you listen, take notes. In fact, sometimes it's even good to ask the person, hey, do you mind if I take some notes while we're chatting? I want to make sure I get this right. That's always a good thing. Next, please. Okay, what is an effective conversation? Well, it's one that builds trust and relationships. We talked about that. I also think it's important to remember that when you're having a conversation, you want it to be a shared learning conversation. Excuse me. I think, a great technique I've seen is once someone has told you about their problems, a great technique to say is, hey, I can understand that. In fact, when we did this at Department of Agriculture, they had a problem that was very similar to what you have experienced. And we found that in general, taking this sort of approach to that problem was going to be a much more effective solution. Tell us about that. And then, well, your person may say, we tried that and it didn't work. And then you can have that conversation. I usually think of conversations when I go in that I'm thinking, okay, I want to go in, I want to let people know what we're going to talk about. We're here today to introduce you to our company and to talk to you about some of the problems that you might be having and to see if there may be some ways where our interests coincide. And then discuss, probe, listen. Always listening, always probing. Don't be on transmit, please. I had a client one time who disregarded my advice on using PowerPoint slides. We had a 40-minute telecon scheduled. I did not hear the client speak once until right at the end when, the executive speak once. My client just talked for the entire 40 minutes. And then the executive says, oh, time's up. I'm sorry. It's interesting, but I've got to run. And we never got an input from this executive, so that's important. So be active in your listening. Lean forward. Listen. I have a picture of an individual here on the slide. Do you think he's having a good time? Body language matters so much. It matters for you and it matters for them. So make sure that you, when you're listening, are leaning forward in your chair, you're looking at them in the eyes, you're taking notes, you're being an interested listener. And you can also take a key and some cues from what your executive is doing with his conversation and see how they're doing. I had my executive assistant always had a little secret code that if I was conveying bad body language, they would drop me a little note and say, hey, Admiral, you're frowning, or hey, Admiral, uncross your arms. So body language is very important from both sides of the aisle. Next. So I just want to wrap up by talking a little bit about what executives really value when you go to see them and you're establishing a value proposition for them. Number one is they like good listeners. Can't talk too much about that. I think we've covered that pretty well. They like team players. They like partners, particularly in Department of Defense military. They're used to the team. They're not individuals. They want to do things as a team. They want their contractor to be a teammate with them, a partner with them, and they want you to be honest and upfront with them. They want you to tell them, it's a great conversation sometimes to say, well, those problems are really interesting. That's not really what we do. We may be able to point you in the direction of someone who can do that. And then many times that opens the door for the executive to say, well, I hear that you can't do this for me, but I was interested in what you had to say about this other thing, and perhaps we could talk about that. So if you're honest with them, I think they'll like it. And if you're showing interest, that you're interested in helping them solve their problems, that's the way to do it. They also like people, when you're talking to them, who can commit to things. Can you bring back a team that does a demo for me next Thursday? Yes, I can. They don't want to hear people who are talking to them say, well, I'll have to get back to my boss. It shouldn't be a problem. So make sure that you have been empowered by your boss when you go in to see these people to do certain things and to make certain commitments. The other thing that's so important is know what your contract vehicles are, because if you happen to get lucky and you do make a sale, even though you weren't trying to, and the executive says, this sounds great, how can I get to you? Don't have the 20,000-mile stare and start looking around. Well, we're not sure. You have to have right in your hip pocket. We have a great, we're an 8A company. You can get to us right away. We have a great relationship with this company. We're already here in this other area where you can then piggyback on. So that's very important that you know what your options are, or what your contract vehicles are, and how they can buy stuff from you. So that's important. And the final thing is options. Executives tend to not like point solutions, and so giving them options. Here's I see 3 options. We could do this, or this might be something you might consider, or we could do a blended version of those. And so make sure that you give them options. Nobody likes point solutions, particularly in the Department of Defense. Next slide, please. One other thing, I think this is our final slide. I think that the most important thing that executives value is your unique perspective. They don't want to hear the same old party line. It's sort of like at some of these small business conventions I go to, and I say, well, what does your company do? Oh, we're a cybersecurity company. Well, so are 10,000 other companies inside the Beltway. So you need to think about what is your uniqueness and what unique perspectives do you bring. We have a unique approach that has not been used before that has proved very effective here or there. So that's always good. You want to always make sure that you're prepared. That goes without saying. And please go in small groups. If you're going to be meeting with an executive, remember the executive will probably have their executive assistant sitting in the room with them, and probably a subject matter expert. So that's like 3 people. Please don't bring in 16 people from your company. You want to keep it sort of even. So I usually tell my clients no more than 3 people coming in to meet with this executive, and then we'll leverage and get the cast of thousands later. And the final thing that I want to leave you with is nothing conveys concern and integrity and uniqueness better than sending a written thank you note after you have seen this executive. It's common practice, certainly within the flag, general officer, and the SCS community amongst themselves, and it should be a common practice with you. Excuse me. When an executive has taken the time to give you 30 or 45 minutes of their time, you should take the time to write a thank you note. And all it has to say is, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I look forward to following up with you on this following thing. I can attach the business card once again, and that says so much. That sets you apart from anyone else who's come in that day. Just dropping them a little email that says thank you, thank you, thank you, not good enough. So with that, I think I've transmitted enough. You can certainly drop me an email. There's my contact information. I'm more than happy to chat with you more about powerful conversations and how to do these conversations and placemats and all that. So with that, I think I'm done, Jennifer.
Super, great information, Lou. Thanks so much for presenting and sharing your knowledge with us. Obviously, many good points that you made. We do have a webinar coming up at 12:30, which will be discussing the strategy of pricing in government contracts. So it's a separate link, so you'll have to log off of this and then log on using the new link. If you don't have the link, it's on our website under the webinar section. Next week at 12 o'clock, we are covering marketing to the government and winning more federal contracts. And then at 12:30, we'll be talking about data privacy, GDPR, and some of those new laws around data. So thanks again, Lou, for sharing your information. Lou's contact information is here if anybody has questions. And thanks again to all the attendees who have joined us today and in the past, and those that will join us in the future. And this concludes the webinar. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so long.